So I want to welcome everyone to today's session on faith, legacy, and dignity. Let us open with prayer. So the Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Dear God, in this Easter season, we are aware that the church in every generation must be reborn anew. We give thanks for those who for over 175 years have worked through faithful stewardship and love to make sure that Christ Church Detroit was there, so that when some of us came along much later, it was there when we needed it, there for us to find and to serve us, and for us to serve, to provide a way for us to serve you. Give us the same faithfulness, stewardship, and wisdom to honor their legacy and to be like them in serving you and making sure that the church is there for those who follow after us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Hi, I'm Jim Treese. I think you all know me, but just in case, I'm Jim Treese. And I wear a number of hats at the church, including secretary of the vestry, but I'm going to moderate this morning's session, which means that I will introduce the speakers in a moment, and I also will field the questions. If you have a question, I suggest you type it into the chat at any time, and then after the presentations are over, I will direct the questions to our two speakers. Let them answer it. I won't try to answer it myself, but this way you can jot down your question in the chat right when you think of it, not having to wait till the end. I also want to make it clear that today we're going to hear a lot of ideas. A few of them may apply to everybody. I personally think everybody should have a will, but I'll let Seth talk about that. But most of them are just ideas and suggestions. We don't know your situation. We don't know your family situation, your financial situation. So we are not trying to hand out legal or financial advice today because it may not apply to you. We just don't know. But we're going to give you a whole lot of ideas for you to think about and consider, and then take to your lawyer or financial planner or somebody else and see, does this make sense for me? So please, we are not offering, free advice at this point. We're offering free ideas. We have two terrific speakers who know a lot more about this stuff than I ever will. First is Seth Lloyd. Many of you know him as the chair of the Outreach Committee, longtime stalwart on outreach. He is a lawyer and has handled wills and probate and stuff like that. His specialty is much more specific than that. And I will stay away from that, but he can offer some legal awareness to our morning's discussion, bring that. Our second speaker is Edwina Simpson, who some of you may know as the national head of the Companions of the Holy Cross, which is the largest Episcopal women's organization in the country. But she is also a longtime member of the church and has worked for many years in planned giving programs and stewardship areas and such. And again, really knows this stuff backwards and forwards. So I heartily am glad to have both of these people here to talk to us today. Seth, why don't you start us off and let's take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jim. The National Church has thought the subject of wills to be sufficiently important that it has put language in the prayer book imposing upon each rector a duty to talk about the need to have a will. And the prayer book language makes it clear that that is first and foremost for the purpose of protecting families, but is also to provide where possible for contributions to religious and nonprofit organizations. And the language is so wonderful, as much of the prayer book language is. Let me just read it to you. Page 445 of the prayer book. The minister of the congregation is directed to instruct the people from time to time about the duty of Christian parents to make prudent provision for the well-being of their families, and of all persons to make wills while they are in health, arranging for the disposal of their temporal goods, not neglecting, if they are able, to leave bequests for religious and charitable uses. I love the language. I tried to find it in King James version when I suspected it might be even more compelling, but was unable to do that. So I'm going to talk about wills today. And it may well be at the risk of boring many of you who know about the importance of having wills or who already have one. But let me cover a number of topics. The first of which is, why make a will? I mean, what's the point? And the simple answer to that question is to make sure that your worldly goods and belongings go where you want them to go when you die. And let me give you two examples to illustrate the issues here. I am just completing a relatively painful term as personal representative for a dear friend who died about a year ago. Her husband had predeceased her. She had a will, and she gave 6 gifts to different charities in the will, including some to Christ Church, by the way. She established a trust for a disabled daughter and left a house in which the disabled daughter lived to that trust. And then she also appointed the trustees of that trust. And then she left the balance of her estate to be distributed equally between the trust and the 2 other children. This is what she wanted, and she accomplished it by means of the will. Now contrast that with my dear cousin Suzanne, who lives in California. Suzanne has no spouse. Her only sibling died some years ago. Her parents are dead. She has a long-term partner who has directed her care and devoted his life in the last 20 years to taking care of her. She has no will, and despite my cajoling, seems to have no interest in drafting one or having one drafted. What happens? Well, under California law, the law dictates what happens, and the court will go up the family tree to her maternal and paternal grandparents, and then come down the family tree. She has no living aunts and uncles, but she does have cousins on both sides of the family tree. So her assets upon her death may well be divided among cousins, some of whom live in North Dakota, whom she has never met. And there will be nothing provided for her longtime partner who has so carefully cared for her over 20 years, and nothing left to charities that she cares deeply about. So it seems to me these 2 examples illustrate quite clearly why you want a will. It's so that your assets go to where you want them to go, and not where state law dictates. Michigan law is quite clear that if there is no will and there is a living spouse and children, some of an individual's assets will go to the spouse, not all, some, and the remainder will go to the children in equal shares. So what if the children are in dramatically different economic situations? Do you want each of them nonetheless to receive equal shares? And do you want the children to inherit money when the spouse really who's caring for them needs it for their purposes? So the question is, whom do you want to receive what? And that's the reason to make a will. The second question is, when should I make a will? And the answer to that is can be conveyed in one word: tomorrow. Don't wait. None of us can know when we will die or become incompetent. And if you don't have a will now, don't put it off. Please don't put it off. The third question: how do I make a will? Well, the first thing you do, it seems to me, is to find a lawyer and have her or him prepare it. Technically, it's not hard. Michigan recognizes a will if it's signed by the individual who makes it and witnessed by two people who also sign it. In Michigan, the courts will also recognize a handwritten will, a so-called holographic will. It must be dated and in the individual's handwriting. But why take a chance that you will write something that simply is ambiguous or doesn't make sense? I think the only responsible thing to do is to find a lawyer who can help you draft the will, who can avoid ambiguities. But it needs to be someone who knows what they're doing. I would be, frankly, of little help in helping you draft a will. I had my own drafted by a lawyer. So I urge you, even though it will cost you some money, and even though we're reluctant to spend money on lawyers' fees, this is one area where you don't want to skimp. Next question. What is it that I own? Now that may seem like a silly way to put it, but what do I own that might be the subject of a will? Well, you'll probably have some or all of this list: bank accounts, an IRA, a 401k account, a 403b account, certificates of deposit, life insurance, stocks, bonds, valuable furniture, jewelry, a home, or more than one home. Now, some of these may already be poised to go to someone. For example, if you have bank accounts, which are joint accounts, by law, the survivor of that joint account becomes the owner of the account when you die. So you want to make sure that the bank account is in your name and the name of someone whom you want to receive the account when you die. An IRA or a 401k or a 403b or life insurance likely already say who receives these assets when you die. But it might have been done years ago that you chose the beneficiary for the assets, and you should check to make sure. Is this still where you want the assets that are in those accounts to be paid? And there may be real tax advantages to handling the distribution of an IRA or other retirement accounts through provisions of your will. You may save taxes by doing that. Another reason to use a lawyer to draft your will who is skilled in the tax aspects of drafting wills. Other items, stocks, bonds, furniture, jewelry, real estate. Whom do you want to receive it? If you don't have a will, as I said earlier, the state of Michigan decides. Now, if you have a will, or if you are making one, you will need to decide who administers the will when you die. And that person is called the personal representative, or also commonly known as the executor. Personal representative is the word contained in the Michigan statute, but many of us talk about who is the executor of your will. Whom do you trust to follow your instructions faithfully? I mean, that's the question it seems to me needs to be asked. And there are lots of rules governing what a personal representative or executor must do. But there are sadly examples of personal representatives not following those rules. So, excuse me, the question is, whom do you trust to faithfully follow the instructions contained in the will? The next question, how do I keep the will up to date? Well, you should review the will if you have one already, or if you draft one now, you should review it periodically. Does it still reflect your desires? Have circumstances changed since you drafted it? Has one of the children to whom you left some assets died? Is one in real need as compared to the other? Are there new charities that you wish to leave money? If not, you can change, if any of those things are true, you can change the will. And that change or amendment is called a codicil. But for a codicil to be valid, it has to comply with the same rules that apply to a will, to the will itself. So it's back to the lawyer. But the codicil is typically not at all complicated and costs much less to get done appropriately. Now, finally, what do you do with the will? Well, Edwina and I were talking about this as we prepared. You need to tell your heirs about the will. The provisions of your will should not come as a surprise. And they should also know that there is a will, and most importantly, where it is. Let me give you an example here, which has been in the news recently, which in some ways is funny, but is really more tragic than funny. It involves Aretha Franklin. Despite being cajoled by lawyer after lawyer to make a will, Aretha Franklin died without anyone knowing whether there was a will or not. In fact, to her heirs, many of them thought that she had never made a will, only to find out that a number of people had different versions of documents which purported to be her last will and testament, undated. So which of them was the last? Which should be followed? Frankly, it was and is a mess. And that's exactly the situation that you don't want to have happen. So tell your heirs about the will and tell them where the will is so that when you die, they will know where it is. If you use a lawyer, typically the lawyer's office retains a copy of the will and can be the repository of it. But they need to know the lawyer's name if you're going to rely on the lawyer's copy of it. So that's what it seems to me is the most important, are the most important questions. Why have a will? So that your assets go where you want them to go. Don't rely on a handwritten will. It's not sufficient to tell your aunt or your cousin or your friend how you would like your assets disposed of after you die. You need a will that will withstand scrutiny by the probate court. Consider what assets go where. Talk to a lawyer about that. Have the lawyer draft the will, and then tell people where the will is located. So happy to answer questions later, but that's a very brief primer on the law associated with wills.
Thank you, Seth. I appreciate that. And I would just underline it to say that, when in doubt, the state will be happy to dispose of your assets in such a way that increases the taxes they take from you. But that's just my comment. Again, a reminder to everyone, if you want to ask a question at any time, just write it in the chat portion. I'll be watching that. I'll pass that along to our speakers later on. But next, I'd like to turn it over to Edwina. Edwina, I'd love to hear from you. You have to unmute yourself first.
I always forget. Thank you all, and it's good to see everybody. I was looking at the weekly message that we get from Christ Church, excuse me, about this program, and I'm going to back up and say, people who know me have known me for a long time, know that the word stewardship is probably going to come up a bit, having worked in that arena of the Episcopal Church for about 20 years. So I'm just going to warn you, but I felt like that Emily's invitation that says, your legacy lives on in the lives you touch. Planning how you can reduce the stress of your surviving family members while extending your legacy beyond the generation that knew you. And to me, that's a major stewardship statement, because stewardship is simply what we do with all we have all of the time, and that includes our time, talent, and treasure. So Seth has very clearly stated it's really important to figure out what you want done with your treasure when you die. And he talked a lot about how we want to leave our treasure to our families. But I'm going to suggest that we also look at that codicil, not codicil, but that rubric in the prayer book, which interestingly enough, back when I started in this work, it was in the old prayer book in the burial office. Somebody finally figured out that was a little late. You needed to put that codicil, that rubric about writing a will in the service for Thanksgiving for the birth of a child. So I think that's, I've always found that rather humorous. But anyway, we really do want to leave a legacy. And what legacy do we want to leave? And as Seth has stressed, it's really important that we keep our families informed about what we want done at the end of our lives. And back when I used to do this, I had this list, write a will. You might need to have a trust or want to have a trust, and that's a different thing. Seth can answer that question. What we want to have done at the end of our lives, what kind of decisions and treatment, and telling people what you want done, planning our funeral service, all the things that we're covering in this program. So I just want to thank Emily and Jim for bringing that to everybody's attention. And the primary thing, as Seth has just said, talk to your family members about what it is you want done. So now I want to talk about what is the legacy we want to leave the larger community. What is it we want to leave to our churches and the favorite charities? It might be someplace that you've done volunteer work as well as at Christ Church. And we call these planned gifts, because they won't ever happen unless you make the plan. I don't think that charitable gifts happen if you don't have a will. You're going to go by the law, but if you wanted to remember your church, it has to be stated somewhere. So planned gifts are any philanthropic gift that's made in light of tax or financial or estate plans. They usually involve an attorney or a financial planner, or like your stockbroker, or if you're interested in a particular agency that has a plan giving staff person, which is what I did when I worked at Oakwood. You can talk to them about plan gifts. And it can be a current gift, like giving stock at the end of the year to avoid capital gains is a planned gift. Deciding you want to give a bigger gift at the end of the year because it'll save taxes, that's a planned gift. It's any way we direct our assets to support the organization. There may be tax benefits, and it directs your assets. But I also think a reason to give a planned gift is because it's good for you. Studies show that the more people are, the better their health. So giving gifts is good for you. And it is a way to say, thank God for all that God has done for you in the course of your lifetime. I've talked a little bit about current gifts, which would be giving stock at the end of the year. And now I'm going to mention some of the deferred gifts you can give, which are gifts that won't happen until you die or it's in the future. And of course, the one that we know most and is the one that's used the most is the bequest in your will or in your trust. And it has language like, I bequeath to Christ Episcopal Church, Detroit, Michigan, a certain percentage of my estate or a certain amount. And I always recommend a percentage because things can happen in life that either reduce or increase our assets. And let's say you wanted to leave, I'm going to just make up a number, $1,000, and it's going to be out of $10,000. But then something happens and that $1,000 goes down to $5,000. You still have to give the $1,000, and then your family's going to get the balance. So the balance is going to be different. So a percentage is a better way to do it, because if your estate decreases, the amount of money you have decreases, you're not going to punish your family. And if it increases, then the charity gets the benefit of that increase. And as Seth suggested, if you have a will now and you want to change it and make a request to Christ Church, just add a codicil that does that. So other assets, I think Seth touched on that. Retirement plans, life insurance policies. The church is named the beneficiary of as a primary beneficiary or contingent beneficiary. Some people still have some savings bonds. That's an easy gift to give. I personally have really looked at how I want, because I don't have a spouse that would receive my IRA tax-free. I'm really directing that my bequests, both for charities and my grandchildren who don't have any income at this point, comes out of my IRA. And you can do that kind of thing because it will save on taxes for your children. And then there are gifts that you can give now. You give the money now, but you get the income from those gifts for the rest of your life. You get a current tax benefit when you do that. It takes it out of your estate. And it's a way to give to organizations like Christ Church. We in the Episcopal Church are fortunate that the Episcopal Church Foundation has taken on this ministry of planned giving, and they offer a lot of services for some of these life income gifts. So I'm just going to put in a plug for the Church Foundation. So one is a charitable gift annuity. I happen to have a charitable gift annuity with the Henry Ford Museum because my husband had gone to school there and he was going to leave him money. And I thought, well, I'll take the benefit because the percentage it was paying was much higher than anything that I could get income-wise from a bank or mutual fund. So in this case, this one is managed by the Henry Ford, but the Church Foundation offers these. And you're guaranteed an income for the rest of your life. It's based on your age. So the older you are, the higher the percentage. So it's real popular with us older folks. And the minimum gift is $5,000. So it's an easy way to do that. You get the income from the rest of your life. The total income is not taxable. And the minimum gift is, oh, and then when you die, what is left in that annuity goes to the beneficiary, the charitable beneficiary. The Church Foundation also has a pooled income fund. It's like a mutual fund. The income is based on whatever the fund earns, and it's only interest and dividends. And so the income varies. The minimum gift is $2,500. Additions can be made at any time, just like you can put into a mutual fund. And it's a good place to put appreciated stocks. Because for a long time, income from these kinds of funds was not as high and as beneficial as the gift annuity. They've not been really popular, but they still are a good, safe way to make a charitable gift. The other major different way is a charitable trust, and there are two types of trust. One is, well, I'm going to say what these trusts do. They provide income to the donor or some other beneficiary for the rest of their lives. They provide a tax deduction based on a formula. And the minimal practical gift is really $100,000. So it's a big gift, but as Seth mentioned with his well-planned will, this person left a trust to support a child that had special needs. And then I'm assuming that this trust, when something happens to that child, is probably going to be split between the other two siblings. Or maybe it's going to be split between the two siblings and charities that this person included. But that is an easy way to take care of a dependent relative or friend, and then have the remainder going to the charities that you care about. And there are two types. One that gives it's based on the percentage of the gift when you create the trust, or it varies every year. So there are options about that. In any of these gifts, I suggest, as Seth does too, you need to talk to your attorney and your family and creating this gift, in any kind of gift. So with regard to the charitable trust, you have to set up some organization or group to manage that trust. Again, the Church Foundation offers that service to members of the Episcopal Church. And so it takes out of your hands the management, and you can choose whoever you want to. So I'm just going to reemphasize what I think has been reemphasized here. Whatever you do, if you're leaving a gift to charities, you do need to tell your children or your heirs, other heirs. Talk about your plans. Tell your children why, or heirs, why you want to make these gifts. Why is it important to recognize these organizations that we have either been a part of or that have been a part of our lives, such as the church. But make sure you talk about your plans, financial, end of life. and your service, what your service is going to be, what kind of service you want to have, and tell your children. I tell the story when my mother died, the closest my siblings and I came to having a fight about anything was over the music for the funeral. And we were having, it was really getting a little testy in the living room of our house that we grew up in. And the phone rang, and I happened to be closest to the phone, and I picked it up, and this voice said, "Oh, hi, Edwina. I just wanted to tell you, I talked to your mother last week, and these are the hymns that she wanted to have sung at her funeral." And I'm like, well, why didn't she tell us? But it was just serendipitous. And of course, it decreased the tension among the 4 children. And again, as Seth said, make records of your financial, medical, and other pertinent information, like the name and address of your attorney, who your financial advisors are, who your medical advisors, and then tell your relatives and closest friends where these records are. So it's information, information. Be a good steward in the end by sharing your wishes for all you have with your heirs, whether family, friend, or church, or charity, will have just one more reason to be thankful for your life. So communicate, communicate, communicate. Any questions? Or are we ready for questions, Jim?
I think we are. We had some slides which we put up as you were giving your comments.
Yeah,
we prepared
I
those
decided,
slides.
I'm glad you did that. I just decided I wouldn't fool with them.
We
I
have,
did have one I was going to put up. Let's see if I can figure out how to. I'm not very good at screen sharing.
if you ask Anthony, Reverend Anthony will put those up, whatever one you want. But one of the questions we have is asked about donor designated funds. And I'll remind people you can continue to submit questions you want to the chat if you wish, or you can ask it yourself if you'd rather. But can you speak for a moment about donor designated funds, Sabrina?
You have to put a gift to the church in your will.
Let's start with donor designated funds. What are those?
Well, that's where you designate how you want the funds to be used. And what I suggest you do is find out from the organization, what do they do with planned gifts? One of the areas I worked in a lot in the church was helping congregations set up really good policies and procedures regarding receipt of planned gifts. And for the church, you can have a trust that will support the church, or the church may decide that their bequest will support outreach or education or some specific ministry within the church. So first of all, talk to the church or the organization about what they do with planned gifts. If you don't like that idea, then you can create a designated gift. Let's say you wanted to endow the music program or give money. And maybe the church has a music fund, and if they do, you can always give to that. But you need to talk to the organization about your designated gift, how you want that used. And the church needs to make decisions about when we get undesignated gifts, what do we do? And how do we use them?
Yeah, if the question has to do with a donor designated fund to a foundation, like the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan, you can do that. I don't know the minimum number. Yeah, I don't know the minimum number that the Community Foundation would ask be donated in order to have such a fund with that foundation. So I'm not clear whether, let's see, Susan has clarified that. I'm talking about setting up one with a brokerage, for example.
Right.
Oh, okay.
I know.
Yeah, I think I think, again, my specialty is not probate, but I think that setting up one with a brokerage would not be sufficient to take it outside of the ultimate control of the state if you should die without having that in a will. If you gave to a foundation, and we're able to designate where the funds go to the foundation, as people do with the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan, I think that gift is outside of the control of the will or the probate court. It's a gift that has been already made to a foundation.
My understanding was that on donor designated funds, you can do this while you're still alive, give money. And most, Charles Schwab and many brokerages have set up a place. You give money so that you take the tax benefit that year. And then in following years, you tell them, I want you to give to this charity or that charity. However, most of those donor designated funds do have the ability to say, we don't recognize that charity. I mean, Catherine, I give to a charity that's outside the United States. I don't know if they would recognize it. Even though that has a US affiliate, it's not on their, if it's not on their list, they'll say, fine, name another one. We're not going to give to that.
Yeah.
So you want to check that out in advance, but that's more for while you're still alive, I believe.
I think so.
Right, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's separate from the questions about the probate. It's just
Yeah.
something that was suggested to me, and then, but I was told that you couldn't use it to like pay a pledge.
My understanding.
Maybe what I'm talking about isn't a donor designated fund. That's why I was asking the question, because I was confused.
My understanding is that some of those donor designated funds don't recognize the term pledge. You have to use other language. You can say, I want you to give an annual gift to the church like this. But if you use the word pledge, they'll say, legally, we don't know what that means. We're not going to deal with it. But you did an interesting one. Do you have to put a gift to the church in the will? It's an interesting question. Or can we just sign papers with the church?
I think it has to go in the will.
I think it does too. I've never heard of it being able to, the church having that authority to.
And what is the limit in Michigan to avoid probate? At what point does probate kick in? And what does money that's left to a beneficiary in an IRA avoid probate?
This is the kind of question that I would often be asked at family reunions. And I would have to say, I don't have a clue. That's a question you need to ask the lawyer who helps you draft the will.
One of the things I thought about as I was looking at, I haven't done one of these for a long time, and there used to be a lot of good estate tax reasons to make gifts to charity. Well, the estate tax threshold is so high now that unless you're really, really wealthy, there's really not much tax benefit. The one benefit would be with your IRA, because, and that's even changed, but I do think that when you give your IRA is left to somebody who's not a spouse, there are some tax implications for that, which is why I decided to figure out, okay, what percentage of my IRA would I need to give away to create a gift of the whatever I want it to be, and then leave the rest to my grandchildren because their income is less than their parents, and then leave everything else to the parents. But that even changes, so it's hard to know how to.
I think that's this question is a good one, Susan. Let's assume that in the course of the upcoming capital campaign, someone makes a pledge to the capital campaign fund drive, and then dies before the pledge is satisfied, and hasn't provided for this in the will. I don't think that the pledge is binding upon the court if it isn't also contained in the will.
That reminds me, that happened in my old parish. A woman left, this is in DC, this is St. Mark's, Emily. Someone had left money and the woman died, or she had made a huge, very big pledge actually. And I don't know if it was for a campaign or what it was for, but she left the money, and her kids challenged it. And they went to court, and actually the church won. So I don't know if it was in her will. I don't know what the issue was, but it was the church, a big pledge to the church, and it was challenged, but the church did prevail. Yeah.
I think the message there is not
Another reason to talk to a lawyer.
Right. Yeah.
I would say the
also
message
the
there is
other
not
thing
that the church won, but that the church had to go to court.
Yeah.
But the other thing, that's another good reason to talk to your family about your plans.
Yeah.
If the children had known about that pledge, it might have been different, maybe not, but
Maybe not.
I think it's to talk.
I'd like to say,
why you're doing what you're doing.
Edwina raised a number of points during her presentation. The previous two, we've had 3 sessions already in this series. We had 2 on planning for your funeral, 1 during a pandemic and 1 in general. Those are both available on our YouTube channel, on the church's YouTube channel, and you can view them if you weren't able to see them before. And we will be having one on making medical end-of-life plans, which are equally important. But the idea that the basic concept that you really need to start communicating about this is you also have to make up your mind about some things. I mean, we all have a story from our personal lives. And for me, one of them is that when my mother died, she and her sister got along fine. There were some, they were basically okay. They had some gripes about who got the arm wire and who got which piece of furniture when their parents died. But the problem was they had never been able to decide what to do with the old family farm. And so what had been farmland owned by 2 people suddenly became farmland owned by the 4 siblings in the Treese family and the 2 siblings from the 2 daughters of my aunt, and 6 people owning patches of farmland is pretty unworkable. You've got to figure out, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to rent it out or whatever? And so all of this requires, yes, making a will is difficult and people put it off. But in fact, some of those decisions we have to be made by somebody. And are you leaving it for your children and heirs to make some of these decisions? Or are you going to relieve them of that issue? So yes, think about it, plan about it, talk with your heirs and your children about it. But the decision will be made by someone. It might be made by the state. It might be made by children or grandchildren, or you can go ahead and take care of it right now and deal with it. But that's the issue. I also want to say that all of these things that Edwina talked about, whether it be charitable remainder trusts or, there's a whole list of possible ways to do planned giving. The Episcopal Church Foundation has excellent brochures about all of these, each and every one of them. So if there's something you hear about this morning or in this talk, or that you come across that you have more questions about, contact the church office and we can get you a copy of that brochure. It's a starting point. You can review it before going in to see your financial planner or whatever. But there's good material from the Episcopal Church Foundation on each and every one of these things and can be very helpful. I want to raise sort of a philosophical question here with our panel, see if you have more experience in this than I do, but why is it, do you think that some people feel a lot more comfortable leaving a large gift to their alma mater than to the church? We've seen that happen. Why?
Well, since I've worked a lot in congregations, I think people are not aware of how well managed or not well managed they are. Whereas our universities have these huge donor gift programs. And I mean, if I look at the University of Michigan and any of the other universities I'm associated with, I say University of Michigan because Bruce left a fund for his former wife, created a fund in memory of his former wife. And she was deceased. And University of Michigan gave us reports and all this kind of stuff, was for the Henry Ford estate. When the estate was taken over by the family, I have not heard one word from them about Alice's fund since it, because they don't have the facilities or the staff to do it. And churches are the same way. I think that people just don't have trust in the church's management of money. And I know churches that I wouldn't leave a bequest to because I know they wouldn't manage the money well.
I think I would suggest there are two reasons. One is the reluctance of the Episcopal Church, particularly, but really it's the one I know the best, to talk about money. And as if that's never an issue. And the more we talk about it in the context of a pledge drive or in the context of post-death planning, the better. But second, to some extent, it's a reflection, I think, of the fact that the church doesn't always touch people in a way that, sadly, in a way that suggests that they ought to leave, as much to their church as they do to their college, and that's. I don't think that's true of Christ Church, but I think it's true of a lot of churches.
Yeah.
I think to Edwina's point, I would say, I mean, I'm one of several people who at one point or another served on the trustees of the diocese. And I think that Christ Church invests our money with the diocese, and it's very well managed. And I'm going to try to explain that to people. But yeah, I agree also that we don't talk about it. And universities touch people at a time when they're in a very formative period of their life. And so they remember that. But it still strikes me as interesting that, Christ Church has been around for 175 years. We all hope it will be around for another 175 years. I'm pretty sure that with or without my gift, my college will still be around for a while. Now, colleges have been known to go out of business, but I do feel like I would like for these congregations to continue, and it's not going to happen if I don't.
So Jim, I'm going to ask you the question that I think gets asked often, and we often cannot answer. If I leave an undesignated bequest to Christ Church, what happens to it?
The first thing that happens, undesignated bequest, 10% goes to outreach. And after that, Emily, the next is that, you think, 2/3 goes to, what is that?
After that, at least 2/3 will go into the unrestricted endowment fund. Mm-hmm. And then the vestry is able to determine what may happen with the rest, whether the entire remainder will actually go to the unrestricted endowment, or if the family at that point may have a particular designation that they would like to add, or even unofficially, knowing the individual or the family, if there was a special interest in social justice or in music or in education, and at that time there is a special need in some of those programs, the vestry may suggest that the final remainder go to that purpose.
Yeah. Anyone can designate where it goes. If you really feel like my interest has always been in education and youth education or music or preservation of the stained glass windows, we have a fund for that. Somebody gave money specifically for that. You can do that. If you leave it undesignated, it becomes first outreach, and then the undesignated endowment, which is, that pays for stuff that, people are often more willing to give to an organ fund or a music fund than they are to give money to say, make sure that you waterproof the basement, or, put in a new boiler when you need to. And so undesignated allows the church the flexibility to deal with whatever comes up. But yes, there are specific plans, there's specific rules we follow, and the vestry is aware of. We'll go to the family and say, okay, this was undesignated, but frankly, do you have any desires that you know, we will certainly take those into account.
Their desires are a need. Here's a need. Maybe
Right,
we use it for
right,
this.
right.
I remember when my mother died, again, the church called, the little church in our hometown, which has no endowment or anything, but they called us and said, you know, we're trying to redo the sacristy, and your mother was on the altar guild all these years. You all like to, you know, we need X number of dollars. Would you be willing to give this, and we'll name the sacristy in memory of her? And of course we did, but it was kind of an interesting way for that congregation to deal with a need, which was not, man, I don't think my mother left a bequest to the church. In fact, I know she didn't. But this is the way they got some of that from her.
Sure.
But it, you know, I think that unlike our universities and larger charities, the church has still a lot of work to do in terms of assuring donors that the gift they give is going to be well used.
I think
And
it's
that's
true.
what people care about. It's not even so much for the what as it is for that it's well used in advancing the things that the church stands for.
I think that's
Big
very,
issue of trust.
it's a trust,
It's a
absolutely.
trust. Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's very true. But I'm going to close by reminding everyone that there's an old saying that if you want to know if you want to know my values, take a look at my checkbook, my credit card statements.
Right, exactly.
That'll tell you, what I value in life. And I would add, if you also want to know my values after, beyond that, take a look at where I've given money in my will. That'll tell you a lot as well.
May I add one question before
Yes.
closing, or a thought and a question? I just want to raise the most frequently asked question that the office and I receive,
Okay.
to make sure that we cover that too. But I was really inspired by your question and responses about, ultimately reluctance or lack of awareness of planned gifts to the church, to a church. And I think from my own perspective, there's sort of an out of sight, out of mind factor as well, because, in normal day church, we see the plate being passed, we're aware of pledges. And I think and I'm just speaking as just like a, lifelong church person, think that, well, that's where the money is. But really, the reality in a number of churches, including our own parish, is that our ultimate longevity has been carried time and time again by planned gifts. And that's certainly true for Christ Church when, all the ups and downs that Detroit has been through and our parish right along with it. There's been time and time again where it's been the presence of a planned gift that has assured the stability and continuance of the parish. And I think that's part of the story that is ours to tell and lift up just as visibly as a plate being passed.
I think
So the question that we most frequently receive, and I wonder if it can be addressed here, is, so I want to name Christ Church in my will. How do I do that? Are there specific words I need to use? And should I let the church know about it? How would you answer that?
Anthony, can you put that slide up if you're listening?
What slide is that again?
There's one that says, I request.
Oh, like you want the one with the language on it?
Yep.
Okay.
But Emily, that statement was really, that would be very helpful for the congregation to hear. Just, that it's not just the plate money, it's the endowment money, and we should all be thinking about it.
I think it would be interesting to make a presentation during pledge drive or during the capital campaign drive that points out how much we would have the budget if there were no ability to withdraw from the endowment, and talk about what would have to be cut if planned gifts in the past hadn't occurred. I think people would be shocked at what would have to disappear.
Well, I also think that gets to the, I was on a webinar the other day about transparency in church finances. And they said, very often we think we're being transparent. There are rules, whether that's from the diocese or from the state, church codes that have to be followed. We follow them, we tell people we follow, and we tell people we follow them. And that's, we're being transparent. No, we aren't. That's not being transparent. Being transparent is saying, letting people who've never been part of the church before know where does the money come from and where does it go. And I think you need to be very specific about that. And particularly these days, I think people want to know. I mean, if I'm giving money, I want to know what's happening with it. I think that's the basic attitude we need to address.
Well, I agree to some extent, but also I think that we as organizations have to create the kind of organization that people trust. And that's, that is telling them what we do, but how that money also makes that's what Seth is talking about. How does the money make a difference in the life of this congregation? If we didn't have X number of dollars in pledges or even more, or what could we do if we had more pledges that we're not doing now? So I think it's the accountability is huge. And I think the church generally does not do a very good job of that. I mean,
I know that room for improvement.
Being transparent is not the church. And I'm not sure. I mean, we know of other charitable organizations that have not been transparent and they've gotten in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
I know that one step toward visibility that I know Jim is leading the way toward is just the lifting up of, just the recognition of those who have named the church in their will, to create that culture and that model, and to underscore that, this is all about relationships and it's about our values, what we hold important and dear. And as circling back to Seth's first point, being intentional about where we want our legacy to be. So we hope and intend to, just establish a legacy society, and it may take a different name along the way, but just being able to recognize those who have named Christ Church in the will, and to underscore that the amount is never, disclosed. It's not about the amount, it's about being in relationship.
Right. And anyone can do it.
Yeah, legacy societies, all major nonprofits have those. Churches, again, we're not supposed to talk about money. So we don't want to wear those things on our sleeve when we should be able to.
And
be comfortable about that.
frankly, Jesus spoke about money an awful lot, so there's no reason we shouldn't.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a hard subject, though.
Yep. We have come to the end of our time. We need to get going so that people can log off and log on to the worship service this morning. I want to thank Edwina and Seth. You've both been very helpful. I really appreciate this.
Very helpful. Thank you.
And
Wonderful. Very interesting.
Right now.
And we will, the whole thing was recorded, so we will be putting it up on the website or our YouTube channel, whichever seems to be more appropriate. So other people can view it when they are comfortable or when they feel a need. Some folks aren't 9:15 a.m. folks, or got it out of the habit anyway on Sundays these days. But really, this has been great. Thank you very much for doing this, and go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Speed of God.
To God.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.